The thunder of hooves pounded against the dry Montana earth. As Owen Reed raced his stallion across the open plains, the weight of 6 years of isolation pressing down on him like the scorching summer sun of 1878. The wind whipped through his dark hair, streaked with premature silver at the temple's testament to the grief that had aged him beyond his 32 years. As the town of Silver Creek emerged on the horizon, Owen slowed his horse, his calloused hand instinctively moving to the worn wedding band he still wore on a leather cord around his neck. Silver Creek had been his home once, before tragedy struck and drove him to the solitude of his ranch miles outside town. Now he only came for supplies, or when Sheriff Donovan needed an extra gun, which happened less frequently as the railroad brought law and order to the frontier. Today's visit was purely practical supplies, mail, and a quick exit before the ghosts of his past could catch up to him. The main street bustled with the usual activity, horses tied to hitching posts, the blacksmith's hammer ringing out, and townsfolk moving with purpose between the general store, bank, and saloon. Owen dismounted in front of Peterson's general store, his tall frame and the twin colts at his hips commanding a respectful berth from passers-by. "Mr. Reed, been a while," called Peterson, the shopkeeper, as Owen pushed through the door. The bell jingled, announcing his arrival, and a few heads turned. "Just need the usual, Peterson," Owen replied, his voice rough from disuse. "And whatever mails come for me. Got it all ready. Figured you'd be in soon enough." Peterson disappeared into the back room, leaving Owen to survey the store's new inventory. A flash of blue caught his eye, a woman in a cornflower dress examining bolts of fabric near the window. Something about the graceful curve of her neck and the way sunlight illuminated her honey blonde hair struck him as familiar. When she turned slightly, profile visible, Owen's heart stuttered in his chest. He gripped the counter's edge to steady himself. It couldn't be. The woman must have sensed his stare because she turned fully toward him, her blue eyes widening in recognition. For a moment, time suspended, the 6 years since he'd last seen her collapsing into nothing. Owen, the voice he'd heard in dreams and nightmares alike. Josephine. Her name escaped his lips as a whisper, like a prayer he'd forbidden himself to utter. Josephine Walker, now Josephine McAllister, according to town gossip, stood before him, not as a ghost but flesh and blood. The woman he'd loved. The woman who'd married his best friend after Owen had fled town in grief. The woman who, according to those same whispers, had been widowed when Thomas McAllister was killed in a stagecoach robbery 2 years ago. What rendered Owen speechless wasn't just seeing her, it was how she smiled at him, with the same warmth and tenderness she'd shown when they were both 20 and the world stretched before them full of promise. She smiled like they were picking up a conversation paused only moments ago, not divided by death, marriage, and 6 years of bitter silence. "I heard you were still around these parts," she said, stepping closer. "Though you've made yourself scarce." Owen nodded stiffly, words failing him as Peterson returned with his supplies. "That'll be $3.40, Mr. Reed," the shopkeeper announced, either oblivious to or politely ignoring the tension between his customers. Owen placed the money on the counter, gathered his supplies, and tipped his hat to Josephine. "Mrs. McAllister," he managed, the formality a shield against the emotions threatening to crack his carefully constructed walls. He was halfway to the door when her voice stopped him. "Owen Reed, are you really going to walk out that door without a proper hello after all this time?" The challenge in her voice was so familiar it nearly brought a smile to his face. "Nearly." "Hello, Josie," he said, using the nickname only he had ever called her. "Goodbye, Josie." The bell jingled as he escaped into the sunlight, his heart hammering. He secured his supplies to his saddle with hands that weren't quite steady, cursing himself for the weakness. 6 years should have been enough to heal the wound of losing her, first to his grief over his wife's death, then to his best friend's love. You always were stubborn. Owen closed his eyes briefly at the sound of her voice behind him. When he turned, she stood on the boardwalk, parcels in hand, that determined set to her jaw he remembered all too well. "Some things don't change," he replied. "And some do." Her eyes softened. "I'm sorry about Elizabeth, Owen, I always was." The mention of his late wife's name sent a jolt through him. Elizabeth Reed had died in childbirth along with their infant son in 1872, shattering the life Owen had built. "I know," he said simply. Josephine stepped closer. "I'm hosting a dinner at my place tomorrow night. Nothing fancy, just a few friends. I'd like you to come." "I don't think that's a good idea. Because of Thomas." Her direct approach hadn't changed either. "He's been gone 2 years, Owen, and he was your friend too once." "That's not," Owen sighed, adjusting his hat. "It's complicated, Josie." "Life's complicated. Dinner's at 6. She handed him a piece of paper with an address. "I'm not at Thomas's old place. I have a small house near the schoolhouse now. I teach there." Before he could formulate a refusal, she was walking away, the blue of her dress vivid against the dusty street. Owen watched her go, telling himself he wouldn't attend, even as he tucked the paper into his vest pocket. He rode home in a daze, his mind replaying that smile, the one that suggested no time had passed, that they were still the young friends who'd ridden together, fished together, shared secrets under summer stars before life and choices had separated them. The Reed Ranch greeted him with its familiar solitude, a modest house, a sturdy barn, grazing cattle, and endless quiet. Owen had built it with his own hands after Elizabeth's death, when staying in their first home became unbearable. He'd retreated here, turned his back on Silver Creek and its memories, focusing on raising cattle and occasionally helping the sheriff when the loneliness became too oppressive. As evening fell, Owen sat on his porch, nursing a glass of whiskey and staring at the paper with Josephine's address. Memory carried him back to a time before Elizabeth, before his life had taken its tragic turn. It was 1868 when Owen first arrived in Silver Creek, a young man of 22 looking to make his fortune in the Montana Territory. He'd found work at the Walker Ranch, where he met both Josephine, the ranch owner's spirited daughter, and Thomas McAllister, the foreman. The three became inseparable friends, though Owen harbored deeper feelings for Josie, feelings he never acted on, because Thomas's affection for her was equally obvious. Then came Elizabeth Porter, the new schoolteacher who captured Owen's heart with her quiet grace. They married in 1870, and Owen believed he'd found his happiness. But fate had other plans. Elizabeth's death tore something essential from him, leaving him hollowed out and bitter. In his grief, Owen pushed everyone away, including Josephine, who had tried to comfort him, and Thomas, who had stood by him. A year later, news reached him that Thomas and Josephine had married. The betrayal he felt was irrational. He had no claim on Josie, had chosen Elizabeth, had pushed them both away, but it solidified his resolve to remain apart from Silver Creek society. Now, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, Owen wondered what would have happened if he'd made different choices. If he'd told Josie how he felt all those years ago. If he'd allowed his friends to help him through his grief instead of shutting them out. The next evening found Owen sitting on the same porch, freshly shaved and dressed in his best shirt, still debating whether to ride into town for Josephine's dinner. The invitation sat on the table beside him, accusing in its presence. "This is foolish," he muttered to himself. draining his coffee cup and standing. 20 minutes later, he was guiding his horse through Silver Creek toward the address Josephine had given him. He told himself he was only going to properly decline the invitation in person, a courtesy to an old friend. But he knew it was a lie even as he thought it. Josephine's home was a modest white clapboard house with blue shutters and a neat garden. Light spilled from the windows, and the sound of conversation and laughter drifted out. Owen hesitated at the gate, almost turning back when the front door opened and Josephine appeared, silhouetted in the warm light. "I saw you from the window," she called. "Were you planning to stand there all evening?" Owen straightened his shoulders and walked up the path. "I came to thank you for the invitation, but I don't think I can stay." Josephine considered him for a moment, then stepped outside, closing the door behind her. In the lamplight from the windows, she looked both familiar and changed, the same blue eyes and determined chin, but with fine lines at the corners of her eyes and a maturity that hadn't been there before. "Why not?" she asked directly. "You know why, Josie. There's too much between us. History." "Yes, bad blood, I don't think so." She moved closer. "Owen, we were friends before anything else, good friends. I've missed that friendship. It's not that simple. It could be." She reached out, her hand hovering near his arm before falling away. "Thomas spoke of you often, you know. Even after everything, he understood why you pulled away." Owen looked away, uncomfortable with the mention of his former friend. "I should have been there for his funeral. I'm sorry I wasn't." "You're here now," she said softly. "Come inside, Owen, have dinner with us. Sarah Miller is here, you remember her. And Dr. Williams and his wife, just friends sharing a meal." Owen hesitated, then nodded once. "All right, but I can't stay long." Josephine's smile was worth the discomfort, bright and genuine, lighting her face in a way that made his chest ache. "Thank you," she said, and led him inside. The dinner was less awkward than Owen had feared. Sarah Miller, the milliner's widow, remembered him kindly. Dr. Williams had treated Elizabeth during her difficult pregnancy and was tactful enough not to mention it. His wife Clara was new to town and treated Owen without the weight of history. The conversation flowed easily around local news, cattle prices, and the railroad's expansion. Throughout the evening, Owen found his gaze drawn repeatedly to Josephine, the way she laughed, the graceful movement of her hands as she served food, the attentive manner in which she listened to each person speak. She had grown into her beauty, he realized, no longer the impetuous girl but a woman of substance and quiet strength. When the other guests departed, Owen made to follow, but Josephine asked him to stay for one more cup of coffee. Against his better judgment, he agreed. "That wasn't so terrible, was it?" she asked as she poured the coffee in the kitchen. "No," he admitted. "It was nice. You should join society more often, Owen Reed. Isolation doesn't suit you despite what you might think." He accepted the cup she offered. "I've grown accustomed to my own company." "That doesn't mean it's good for you." She sat across from him at the small kitchen table. "What do you do out there all day besides tend your cattle, Reed? Think, fix what needs fixing," he shrugged. "It's a quiet life, too quiet." Her gaze was steady. "I remember when you used to laugh, Owen, when you played the harmonica on Saturday nights and told stories that had everyone hanging on your every word. That was a long time ago. Not so long that it can't be again." Owen set down his cup with more force than intended. "Why are you doing this, Josie? Why now, after all this time?" She didn't flinch at his sudden sharpness. "Because life is too short to waste on regrets and missed opportunities. Because I've spent 2 years as a widow thinking about the paths not taken. Because when I saw you yesterday, I realized I've missed my friend." "Friend," he repeated, the word both comfort and wound. Josephine's eyes softened. "For now, yes. Friendship is where we begin, Owen, where we've always begun." The implication in her words that friendship might lead to something more hung between them, neither acknowledged nor denied. Owen felt simultaneously trapped and freed by the possibility. "I should go," he said, standing. "Thank you for dinner." She walked him to the door, pausing with her hand on the latch. "The town's holding a harvest dance next Saturday. Will you come?" Owen looked down at her, at the hope in her expression, and found himself nodding. "Maybe. I'll save you a dance, just in case." She opened the door, then surprised him by rising on tiptoe to kiss his cheek. "Good night, Owen." The touch of her lips lingered as he rode home under a sky brilliant with stars. For the first time in years, the solitude of his ranch felt less like sanctuary and more like emptiness. Over the next week, Owen found himself making excuses to ride into town supplies he suddenly needed: a book to return to the small lending library, a horseshoe that required the blacksmith's attention. Each time he found reasons to pass by the schoolhouse, sometimes catching glimpses of Josephine with her students, her patient instruction and warm smiles. On Wednesday, he encountered her directly at the mercantile, where she was purchasing slate pencils for her class. "Mr. Reed," she greeted him formally, eyes twinkling at their pretense of casual acquaintance. "What brings you to town again so soon?" "Coffee," he replied, holding up the package. "Ran out unexpectedly." "How unfortunate," she said, failing to hide her smile. "You seem to be having quite a run of domestic emergencies lately." Owen felt a flush creep up his neck. "Just poor planning on my part." "Well, since you're here, perhaps you could help me carry these supplies back to the schoolhouse. My arms aren't as long as yours." He agreed, of course, and found himself spending an hour helping her arrange new maps on the schoolroom walls and move desks to accommodate a new student. The easy companionship between them felt both familiar and novel, like rediscovering a favorite book forgotten on a shelf. "Will I see you Saturday?" she asked as he prepared to leave. "I haven't decided," he hedged. Josephine nodded, not pressing. "Either way, I'm glad you came today, Owen." He tipped his hat and left, but the warmth in her voice followed him home. Saturday arrived clear and cool, a perfect early autumn day. Owen spent the morning mending fences, deliberately exhausting himself with physical labor to avoid thinking about the dance. By afternoon, he'd convinced himself he wouldn't attend. What business did a reclusive widower have at a town celebration? But as the sun began its descent, he found himself in front of the small mirror in his bedroom, running a razor over his jawline and reaching for the good shirt he hadn't worn since Elizabeth's funeral. Some impulse deeper than conscious thought was driving him, and for once, he didn't fight it. The harvest dance was held in the large barn belonging to the Andersons, whose property bordered the town. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting golden light over hay bales arranged as seating and tables laden with food. A small group of musicians, fiddle, guitar, harmonica, and drum, played lively tunes while couples whirled across the floor. Owen arrived late, hovering at the entrance, suddenly unsure of his decision. Then he saw her, Josephine, in a dress the color of autumn leaves, her hair arranged in a simple but elegant style, laughing at something Sarah Miller had said. As if sensing his presence, she looked up, her eyes finding his across the crowded space. That smile again, the one that collapsed time and distance, that suggested an unbroken connection despite all that had happened. Owen found himself moving toward her without conscious decision. "You came," she said when he reached her, pleasure evident in her voice. "I did," he agreed, suddenly awkward, "and just in time." She gestured to the musicians who were starting a waltz. "I believe you owe me a dance, Mr. Reed." He hadn't danced since Elizabeth, hadn't held a woman in his arms or moved to music. For a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm him. But Josephine was looking up at him with such open expectation that refusal seemed impossible. "I might be rusty," he warned as he offered his arm. "Some things you don't forget," she replied, placing her hand in the crook of his elbow. She was right. As they joined the other couples on the floor, his body remembered the steps, the proper distance to maintain, the gentle pressure of leading. Josephine followed his movements with natural grace, her hand warm in his, her other resting lightly on his shoulder. "See." "Not so terrible," she murmured as they turned. "No," he agreed, surprising himself with a small smile. "Not terrible at all." They danced in silence for a few moments, the music wrapping around them, creating a private space amidst the crowd. "I've been thinking about what you said," Owen finally spoke, "about missed opportunities." Josephine's eyes met his, curious but patient. "I missed 6 years," he continued. "Walled myself away because it was easier than facing the pain. Easier than seeing you with Thomas and confronting all the choices I made." "We all made choices, Owen," she said softly. "Some we regret, some we don't. But we can't change the past, only decide what to do with the present." "And what do you want to do with the present, Josie?" The question slipped out before he could reconsider its boldness. She didn't look away. "I want to see if there's still a path forward for us, whatever shape that might take. I want to know if the connection we once had can be rebuilt." The music ended, but neither moved to separate. Around them, couples shifted, new partners were found, but Owen and Josephine remained still, the moment suspended between them. "I'd like that too," Owen finally said, the admission both terrifying and liberating. Josephine's smile was radiant. "Then let's begin." The evening unfolded with surprising ease after that. They danced twice more, shared cider and apple cake at one of the tables, and really talked for the first time in years. Owen found himself telling her about the books he'd read in his isolation, the improvements he'd made to his ranch, even some of the darker moments when loneliness had threatened to consume him. Josephine spoke of her marriage to Thomas, a partnership based on mutual respect and friendship, rather than passionate love, and her work with the town's children, which had become her purpose after his death. "Thomas knew, you know," she said as Owen walked her home under a canopy of stars. "About how I felt about you, always had felt." Owen stopped walking, stunned. "What?" Josephine turned to face him. "He knew I cared for you even before you married Elizabeth. He also knew you never saw me that way back then, not until it was too late." "That's not true," Owen said hoarsely. "I always saw you, Josie. Thomas was my friend, and he made his feelings for you so clear. I stepped aside because I thought that was the honorable thing to do. And then Elizabeth came," Josephine continued gently. "And you truly loved her. I know that, Owen. I never resented your happiness with her. But after, when she died..." Owen struggled to articulate the complexity of that dark time. "I couldn't bear anyone's kindness, especially yours. And then when you married Thomas, we both thought you'd never come back to us to Silver Creek," she explained. "Thomas proposed knowing I wasn't in love with him, but we had friendship and respect. He said that was enough for him." "Was it?" Owen asked. "Enough for you?" Josephine was quiet for a moment. "It was a good marriage in its way. Thomas was kind and steady. We built a life together, but there was always something missing." She looked up at him, moonlight silvering her features. "I don't want to dishonor his memory by saying that, but it's the truth." They had reached her house, the small porch illuminated by a single lamp she'd left burning. Owen felt as though he stood on the edge of a precipice, the next words, the next action, potentially life-changing. "Thank you for coming tonight," Josephine said, filling the silence. "For dancing with me, for talking. Thank you for not giving up on me," he replied. "For smiling at me like no time had passed." Her eyes widened slightly at his words, and she stepped closer. How could I not? Some connections don't fade, Owen, no matter how much time passes. The moment hung between them, ripe with possibility. Owen wanted to kiss her, realized he'd wanted to since the moment he saw her in Peterson's store, but hesitation held him back. It was too soon, too complicated, too weighted with their shared past. Josephine seemed to read his thoughts. She squeezed his hand once, then stepped back. "Good night, Owen. Will I see you tomorrow? The service starts at 10, church, of course. Another social obligation he'd abandoned years ago. Yes, he found himself saying, I'll be there. Her smile was worth the commitment. Good, sleep well. Owen watched her enter her house before turning toward where he'd left his horse. The night air felt electric against his skin, his mind whirling with revelations and possibilities. For the first time in 6 years, he rode home with something like hope flickering in his chest. The next morning, Owen arrived at the small white church on Silver Creek's Main Street just as the bell was ringing. He'd polished his boots, pressed his best suit, and even trimmed his beard, efforts that drew curious glances from townsfolk who'd grown accustomed to his disheveled isolation. Josephine was already seated near the front, but she turned as if sensing his entrance. The smile she gave him drew attention from several nearby congregants, including Sheriff Donovan, whose raised eyebrow suggested both surprise and approval. Owen slid into a pew toward the back, nodding acknowledgments to people he'd once called neighbors and friends. After the service, he found himself surrounded by well-wishers, ranchers who wanted to discuss cattle prices, mothers who remembered him teaching their now-grown sons to fish, old men who recalled his skill at cards. It was overwhelming after so much solitude, but not unpleasant. Owen realized with some surprise that he'd missed the sense of community, of belonging to something larger than himself and his grief. Josephine made her way to him eventually, resplendent in a blue dress that matched her eyes. "You survived," she teased gently. "Barely," he replied with a small smile. "I'd forgotten how much this town likes to talk." "They've missed you," she said simply, "as have I." She glanced around at the dispersing congregation. "I usually take a walk by the creek after service. Would you care to join me?" They strolled along the banks of Silver Creek, the water glinting in the autumn sunlight, fallen leaves crunching beneath their boots. The conversation flowed easily between them, as if the years of separation were gradually being erased by each shared word and smile. "I've been thinking," Owen said as they paused to watch a hawk circle overhead, "about what you said regarding missed opportunities." Josephine turned to him, attentive but silent, allowing him space to continue. "I've wasted too much time already," he said, his voice low and earnest. 6 years hiding from life, from connections, from possibilities. He met her gaze directly. "I don't want to waste any more time, Josie." "What are you saying, Owen?" Her voice was steady, but he could see the quickened pulse at her throat. "I'm saying I'd like to court you properly. If you'll allow it." The words felt both foreign and right on his tongue. "Not rushing, respecting what you had with Thomas, but moving forward, together." Josephine's smile bloomed slowly, transforming her face. "I'd like that very much, Owen Reed." The weeks that followed marked a transformation in Owen's life. He began joining Josephine for Sunday dinners after church, sometimes cooking for her at his ranch, showing her the improvements he'd made and the books that had kept him company during his isolation. They rode together through the golden autumn countryside, fished in the creek where they'd spent countless hours as young friends, and gradually relearned each other's habits and preferences. Owen discovered that Josephine now preferred coffee to tea, had developed a talent for sketching, and harbored a secret ambition to travel to San Francisco someday. Josephine learned that Owen had taught himself to play chess during his solitude, had a surprising knowledge of poetry gleaned from his extensive reading, and still occasionally suffered nightmares about Elizabeth's death, though they came less frequently now. As November arrived with its biting winds and first dusting of snow, Owen found himself in Silver Creek more often than not. He helped repair the schoolhouse roof, attended the Thanksgiving celebration at the church, and even played his harmonica at a small gathering at the sheriff's home, his fingers remembering the old tunes as if they'd never stopped playing. The town welcomed him back gradually, without fanfare, accepting his return to their midst as naturally as they had respected his withdrawal. If people noted the growing closeness between the widowed teacher and the once reclusive rancher, they were tactful enough to keep their observations to themselves, at least in Owen's hearing. December brought heavier snow and the approach of Christmas. Owen found himself considering a future he hadn't dared imagine since Elizabeth's death, one with companionship, purpose beyond mere survival, perhaps even love. The thought both exhilarated and terrified him. What right did he have to happiness after failing Elizabeth so completely? The guilt that had driven him into isolation still lurked beneath the surface, ready to resurface in quiet moments. One evening, as they sat before the fire in his ranch house after dinner, Josephine noticed his pensive mood. "Where have you gone?" she asked softly, her hand covering his. "You're here, but your mind is miles away." Owen sighed, turning his hand to clasp hers. "I was thinking about Elizabeth." Josephine didn't withdraw as he feared she might. Instead, she squeezed his hand encouragingly. "Tell me." "I couldn't save her," he said, the admission painful even after 6 years. "The baby was breech. Dr. Williams said a specialist in Helena might have been able to help, but the snow was too deep to travel. I watched her suffer for 18 hours before they both died." "Oh, Owen." Josephine's eyes shimmered with tears. "I'm so sorry." "I promised to protect her," he continued, the words pouring out now, "to keep her safe, and I failed. Just like I failed you and Thomas by withdrawing when you tried to help me through my grief." "You didn't fail anyone," Josephine said firmly. "Elizabeth's death wasn't your fault. And as for Thomas and me, yes, we were hurt when you pushed us away, but we understood. Grief can make us do things that seem irrational to others." "I've spent 6 years punishing myself," Owen admitted. "Denying myself connections, happiness, even the simple pleasure of conversation. And now," she prompted when he hesitated. "Now I'm afraid," he confessed. "Afraid that, by allowing myself to care for you, to imagine a future together, I'm somehow betraying her memory. And simultaneously afraid that I'll fail you too, somehow." Josephine was quiet for a long moment, her thumb tracing patterns on the back of his hand. "Elizabeth wouldn't want you to spend your life alone, Owen. I didn't know her well, but I know she loved you deeply. She would want you to be happy." "How can you be sure?" "Because that's what love is," she said simply. "Wanting the best for someone, even if that means a life that continues after you're gone." She hesitated, then added, "It's what Thomas would want for me too." Owen looked into her eyes, seeing the sincerity there, and felt something shift within him, as if a weight he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there suddenly lightened. "I care for you, Josie," he said quietly. "More than I thought possible to care for anyone again, and it frightens me." "I know," she replied, moving closer. "I care for you too. And yes, it's frightening opening yourself to the possibility of loss again. But the alternative is to never truly live, and I think we've both done enough of that." Owen reached up to touch her cheek, marveling at the softness of her skin beneath his work-roughened fingers. "When did you get so wise?" "Oh, I've always been wise," she teased, leaning into his touch. "You were just too stubborn to notice." The laughter that bubbled from him felt like a release of tension, of guilt, of the paralysis that had gripped him for so long. When it faded, he found himself looking at Josephine with new clarity, seeing not just the echo of the girl he'd once known, but the woman she'd become, strong, compassionate, and beautiful in ways that transcended the physical. "May I kiss you, Josie?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Her answer was to lean forward, closing the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative with the weight of history and hope, then deepening as years of unacknowledged longing surfaced. Owen's arms encircled her, drawing her closer, while her hands framed his face with exquisite tenderness. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I think I've been waiting to do that since I was 22 years old," he admitted. Josephine's laugh was soft and joyful. "Then we have a lot of catching up to do, Owen Reed." As Christmas approached, Owen found himself embracing the holiday spirit for the first time since Elizabeth's death. He helped decorate the schoolhouse for the children's pageant, contributed a substantial donation to the church's charity fund for struggling families, and even arranged for a special gift to be delivered from Denver for Josephine. The relationship between them blossomed in the winter cold walks through snow-covered fields, evenings reading by the fire, increasingly passionate encounters that always stopped short of full intimacy, both respecting the propriety expected of a courting couple in their small community. On Christmas Eve, following the children's pageant at the schoolhouse, Owen invited Josephine to his ranch for dinner. He'd spent days preparing, cleaning every corner of the house, planning a meal of roast duck with all the trimmings, and arranging pine boughs and candles to create a festive atmosphere. When she arrived, her cheeks flushed from the cold and snowflakes clinging to her cloak, Owen felt his heart swell with an emotion he'd been afraid to name. "Merry Christmas, Owen," she said, presenting him with a carefully wrapped package, "though you should wait until tomorrow to open it." "I'll try to contain my curiosity," he replied, helping her remove her cloak and leading her into the warmth of the house. "Though I make no promises." Dinner was a success, the food delicious, the conversation flowing easily between them, punctuated by laughter and moments of comfortable silence. After they'd eaten, Owen built up the fire in the main room and poured them each a small glass of brandy. "I know we agreed to exchange gifts tomorrow," he said, settling beside her on the sofa, "but I find I'm not as patient as I once was." Josephine smiled, cradling her glass. "Age making you impetuous, Mr. Reed." "Perhaps it's the company," he countered, reaching into his pocket. "May I give you your gift now?" At her nod, he withdrew a small velvet box. Josephine's eyes widened as she set down her glass to accept it. "Owen," she breathed, her fingers hovering over the box without opening it. "It's not what you might think," he said quickly. "Or rather, not exactly. Please open it." Inside, nestled on a bed of satin, lay a delicate gold locket engraved with intricate scrollwork. Josephine opened it to find it empty, waiting for contents yet to be added. "It's beautiful," she said, genuine appreciation in her voice. "But I don't understand." Owen took a deep breath. "The locket represents a promise, Josie. A promise that I'm ready to move forward, to build new memories worthy of being preserved." He took her hand in his. "I'm not asking for marriage, not yet. That would be too soon for both of us. But I am asking if you'll consider a future where that might be possible." Josephine's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Owen Reed, are you asking to officially court me with the intention of marriage?" "I am," he confirmed, suddenly nervous. "If you'll have me." Her answer was to launch herself into his arms, nearly knocking him backward on the sofa. "Yes," she whispered against his neck. "Yes, I will have you, Owen Reed, stubborn man that you are." He held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, marveling at how completely his life had transformed in the few months since she'd smiled at him in Peterson's store. The grief and guilt that had defined him for 6 years hadn't vanished. He suspected they never would entirely, but they had receded, making space for joy, for connection, for love. "I love you, Josie," he murmured against her temple. "I think part of me always has." She drew back to look at him, her expression radiant. "And I love you, Owen, through all the years and all the pain that never changed." Their kiss was a promise of healing, of patience, of a future built together rather than apart. When they finally separated, Owen fastened the locket around Josephine's neck, his fingers lingering on the delicate chain. "Now," he said with a smile, "I believe you brought something for me." Josephine laughed, retrieving her package from the side table. "It seems inadequate now, but—" Owen unwrapped it carefully to reveal a leather-bound journal, the cover tooled with his initials. "It's perfect," he said sincerely. "I thought perhaps you might start writing again," she explained. "You used to keep a journal, remember? You told me once it helped you make sense of your thoughts." The thoughtfulness of the gift, that she remembered this detail from so long ago, touched him deeply. "Thank you," he said, voice rough with emotion, "for remembering who I was, for helping me find my way back." The night deepened around them, snow falling gently outside the windows, the fire casting golden light across the room. They talked of the future, tentative plans and hopes, acknowledgement of challenges to overcome, promises to honor the past while building something new. When the hour grew late, Owen drove Josephine back to town in his sleigh, the runners cutting smooth tracks through fresh snow, the night sky brilliant with stars. At her door, their goodnight kiss lingered, a sweet promise of all that was to come. Spring arrived in Montana with its customary drama, fierce winds giving way to gentle breezes, sudden snowstorms followed by days of brilliant sunshine, the land gradually emerging from winter's grip in a riot of new growth. Owen and Josephine's courtship blossomed alongside the season. They were a common sight in Silver Creek, now riding together on Sunday afternoons, attending social gatherings, sitting side by side in church. Owen had become a frequent visitor to the schoolhouse, sometimes bringing interesting rocks or artifacts he'd found on his property for the children to examine, or helping with repairs to the building. The ranch no longer felt like a place of exile, but a home being reborn. Owen added a room to the house, planted a garden for the first time, and even acquired a dog, a half-grown collie mix that Josephine had rescued from a traveling peddler who'd been mistreating it. As May turned to June, bringing with it the promise of summer, Owen found himself standing before Elizabeth's grave for the first time in nearly 6 years. He'd avoided the small cemetery on the hill overlooking Silver Creek, unable to face the tangible reminder of his loss. Now, hat in hand, he stood in the warm sunshine, looking down at the simple headstone that bore her name and that of their infant son, James. "I should have come sooner," he said aloud, his voice carried away by the gentle breeze. "I'm sorry for that, Elizabeth, sorry for a lot of things." A meadowlark called from a nearby tree, its clear notes punctuating the peaceful silence. "I've met someone," Owen continued after a moment. "Or rather, reconnected with someone. Josephine Walker, you remember her. She's a widow now, too." He paused, feeling slightly foolish talking to a stone, yet needing to say the words. "I love her, Elizabeth, and I think you'd approve. You always said life was for living, even when it hurts." The memory of Elizabeth's voice came to him then, clear as if she stood beside him. "Promise me you won't stop living if something happens to me, Owen. Promise you'll find joy again." He'd made that promise, then broken it for 6 long years. "I'm keeping my promise now," he said softly. Late, but sincere. As he placed the wildflowers he'd gathered on the grave, he heard footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw Josephine approaching, respectful of his privacy but offering silent support. "I thought I might find you here," she said when she reached him. "Sheriff Donovan mentioned he saw you heading this way." Owen nodded, taking her hand. It was time. Past time, really. Josephine looked down at the grave, then back to Owen. "Would you like some time alone?" "No," he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I've been alone enough. I'd like you to be here if that's all right." "Of course." She squeezed his hand. "Hello, Elizabeth," she said softly to the headstone. "I want you to know I'll take care of him, and I'll make sure he doesn't forget you or little James." The simple words, spoken with such genuine feeling, moved Owen deeply. He put his arm around Josephine's shoulders, drawing her close to his side, and felt something settle within him, not an ending of grief, but a transformation of it into something that could coexist with new joy. They stood together for a while longer, the summer breeze playing around them, before turning to walk back toward town. As they crested the hill, Silver Creek spread before them, the cluster of buildings, the winding creek that gave the town its name, the surrounding ranchlands stretching toward distant mountains. "I've been thinking," Owen said as they began their descent, "about the future." Josephine glanced up at him, curiosity in her blue eyes. "What about it?" "We've been courting for 6 months now," he began, suddenly nervous despite all they'd shared. "I know we agreed to take things slowly, to honor our pasts while building something new." "We did," she agreed, her expression growing more intent. Owen stopped walking, turning to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Josephine Walker, I've loved you in some form since I was 22 years old, first as a friend, then as something I couldn't admit to myself, and now as the woman who brought me back to life when I thought that part of me was buried forever." Josephine's eyes widened, her lips parting slightly as she realized what was happening. "I don't want to wait any longer," Owen continued, dropping to one knee on the grassy hillside. "I want to build a life with you, raise cattle, perhaps children, grow old watching sunsets from our porch." He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "Will you marry me, Josie?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "Yes, Owen Reed, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms, lifting her off her feet in his joy. Their laughter echoed across the hillside, bright and free, a sound that would have seemed impossible to Owen a year before. When he set her down, Josephine touched the ring wonderingly. "It's perfect. How did you know pearls are my favorite?" "You told me once long ago," he replied, "when we were fishing at the creek. You said diamonds were too showy, but pearls had a quiet beauty that spoke to you." "You remembered that," she marveled. "It must have been 15 years ago." "I remember everything about you, Josie," he said softly. "Even the things I tried to forget." They were married on a perfect July day in 1879, in the same church where they'd reconnected months before. The entire town turned out for the celebration, the small building overflowing with well-wishers. Josephine wore a dress of ivory silk with pearl buttons, a gift from her students' parents, and carried wildflowers gathered from the hills around Silver Creek. Owen, resplendent in a new suit ordered from Denver, waited for her at the altar with Sheriff Donovan standing as his best man. When Josephine appeared at the church door, sunlight illuminating her like a vision, Owen felt his heart might burst with happiness. She walked toward him with steady steps, her eyes never leaving his, that same smile on her face, the one that had started everything, that spoke of connection transcending time and circumstance. The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. They exchanged traditional vows, their voices clear and certain. then added personal promises they'd written together to honor each other's past while building their future, to face life's joys and sorrows as one, to never again let pride or fear separate them. The celebration afterward was jubilant tables groaning with food contributed by townsfolk, music provided by local musicians, including Owen on his harmonica for several numbers, dancing that continued well into the evening. As twilight descended, the newlyweds slipped away to begin their life together at the ranch that would now be their shared home. Their first night as husband and wife was a revelation, tender exploration giving way to passionate discovery. Years of unspoken longing finally finding expression. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the moonlight streaming through the bedroom window, Owen marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "What are you thinking?" Josephine asked, her head pillowed on his chest. "That I'm the luckiest man in Montana territory," he replied, stroking her hair, "and that I almost missed this by hiding away from life." "But you didn't," she reminded him, propping herself up to look into his eyes. "You found your way back. We found each other." "Thanks to you," he said. "And that smile in Peterson's store," Josephine laughed softly. "I was terrified that day, you know, seeing you again after so long, not knowing if you'd even speak to me." "I almost didn't," Owen admitted, "but something in your eyes, it was like no time had passed. Like we were still those young friends with our whole lives ahead of us." "We do have our whole lives ahead of us, Owen," she said, touching his face with gentle fingers. "Different than we might have imagined at 20, perhaps, but no less full of possibility." He pulled her close again, overwhelmed by gratitude for this second chance at love, at connection, at truly living rather than merely existing. "I love you, Mrs. Reed," he murmured against her hair. "And I love you, Mr. Reed," she replied, settling against him as if she'd always belonged there. Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come. The years that followed brought changes to Silver Creek and to the Reed Ranch. The railroad's arrival in 1880 transformed the once sleepy town into a bustling center of commerce. New buildings sprang up, including a proper schoolhouse where Josephine continued teaching until the birth of their first child in 1881. A daughter they named Elizabeth Sarah Reed, honoring both Owen's first wife and Josephine's mother. A son followed 2 years later, Thomas James Reed, his name's a tribute to the past, while his bright eyes and curious nature pointed firmly to the future. Owen proved to be a devoted father, finding in his children a joy he'd once thought forever denied him. The ranch prospered under their joint care. Owen's skill with cattle combined with Josephine's head for business resulted in one of the most successful operations in the region. They added land, built a larger house while preserving the original cabin, and employed several hands to help with the expanding herd. Through it all, their love deepened, tested by the ordinary challenges of life, but strengthened by shared purpose and the hard-won wisdom of those who know what it means to lose and find each other again. On their 10th anniversary in 1889, as Montana prepared for statehood, Owen surprised Josephine with a trip to San Francisco, fulfilling the dream she'd mentioned long ago. They spent 2 glorious weeks exploring the vibrant city, visiting theaters and restaurants, walking along the bay, and even having their photograph taken by a professional photographer, a formal portrait that would take pride of place in their home for decades to come. Upon their return, as they crested the familiar hill overlooking Silver Creek, now a proper town with a train station, bank, and hotel, Owen reined in the horses and turned to his wife. "Happy?" he asked simply. Josephine looked at the landscape, spread before them, the town where they'd met as young people, the cemetery where their past loved ones rested in peace, the distant outline of their ranch where their children waited with their trusted housekeeper, Mrs. Hollister. "Completely," she answered, her smile as radiant as it had been that day in Peterson's store 11 years earlier. "And you?" Owen took her hand, the gold band on her finger catching the late afternoon sunlight. "More than I ever thought possible," he replied honestly. "You gave me back my life, Josie. You reminded me that love doesn't die even when those we love do. It just waits to be reawakened. We gave each other back our lives," she corrected gently, "and we honor those we've lost by living ours fully." Owen leaned across to kiss her, marveling as always at how the simple touch of her lips could still send warmth coursing through him after all these years. "Let's go home," he said when they parted. "Our children are waiting." As they drove down the hill toward their future, Owen reflected on the long, winding path that had brought him here from grief-stricken isolation to a life overflowing with love and purpose. The ghost of his past no longer haunted him, but rather stood as a witness to the resilience of the human heart, its capacity to heal and love again. And it had all begun with a smile, one that had bridged years of separation and pain, that had told him without words that it was never too late to begin again. That some connections transcend time, distance, and even death itself. That love, once born, never truly dies but waits patiently to be rediscovered, like gold beneath the Montana soil, precious, enduring and worth every effort to unearth.